If you want to come forward, since there's so few people.
I'm good.
You're right there. Well,
hi, Alan. It's great that you can do another talk with me.
good to see you again, Debbie.
And thanks to Yussi for sorting it all out for us.
Yes. And we're here in Helsinki.
And you're going to give a workshop, is that correct?
No, it's just a talk.
Oh, right, okay. And is it a talk on anything particular today?
What's the title of our talk, Lucy? Do you remember?
Today we were going to talk
About centering.
centering
Yeah.
necessity for our work.
Yes. So, Debbie, if you have any questions related to that or something else, you're welcome to ask, and also you guys as well. And
Well, I was going to ask if maybe we could start with saying why Gurdjieff said groups and workshops were important, or classes, or being with a teacher.
well, I think that Mr. Gurdjieff found through personal experience that when you were with a group of people, and he was with groups of people from almost the very beginning, the seekers of truth. You speak English, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. And he found that a group of people could bring together different kinds of viewpoints and expertise that a single person couldn't, even Gurdjieff himself, and that together they would be able to find the source of these teachings that he was so interested in, which was connected with the eventually the Simone Brotherhood. And so I think all of us who have been in groups, myself in the beginning for about 37 years in the foundation, found that people have very different perspectives on the work, ones that you may not think of yourself. And to be open to other people also helps to reduce the ego, to listen carefully to others. And as Krishnamurti used to say, you know, if you could just listen, and it's really a discipline to listen and not to be tempted to be lost in your own associations and your own identifications. So it's good both from the point of view of knowledge that you can gain from other people, and also because it tests your ability to be centered in yourself and focused rather than lost in dreams. And of course, having a teacher who's been through these conditions and has gone through the difficulties themselves, just like somebody in life. If you had an uncle or somebody who had been through a lot of things and you had difficulties, you wanted to talk to this person who has life experience. Well, in this case, this is true in the work. You want to talk to people who have experience in the work, because we all come upon many of the same difficulties in the work. And there are certainly objective ones that we find that without Mr. Gurdjieff's teachings, we wouldn't know about. Things like the how to self-observe, what is self-remembering, what is presence, all these what I call the three pillars of the Gurdjieff work are something new to us unless we have a teacher or unless we have a teaching like Mr. Gurdjieff has presented to us.
I notice in today's world that there's many people having to study on their own. That's why I wanted to bring up about the workshop and why it's important perhaps to meet other people in the work.
Yes, I think that's important to see that there are other people that have a similar interest, and one is not necessarily a lunatic for searching for what Madame says, the reality of being.
Maybe we could just speak a bit about what the reality of being is.
Well, I think it is very connected with our subject today, which is this idea of centering. Perhaps we're not clear about what this is. Where am I going to center myself? And certainly one could say, well, I want to be connected with my centers. Gurdjieff speaks about these are the brains, these are the centers of certain functions or activities, the intellect, the emotions, and the body, as well as, of course, the sexual center and instinctive center, the 5 lower centers. And if we begin to bring our attention to these centers, that is, these existing centers, one can gradually begin to reduce the noise in them, the useless activities, and come closer and closer to the inner part of these centers, whether it's the physical presence that one wishes to have. And of course, as you know, and as we have in this little diagram up here, there are these crossings that occur from the very beginning, the ray of creation down here, Do, Re, Mi, and up through the organic life and the 3 centers of organic life, the moving, emotional, intellectual, and then higher centers. That there is, in order to find a center in the moment, it is not enough just to point to something, because a center in space requires at least 3 dimensions. Right? So I have to have this crossing of vertical and horizontal planes. And then I have to have a third that places me in space, right? And now I say, okay, now I can find this center, right, in the 3-dimensional space. And the first center that I'm really interested in is not so much the moon, that is the personality, which has its own tenuous center, but is connected with essence and the earth. And that is, in the terms of ancient teachings, like Taoist teachings and so on, is in the lower abdomen. So somehow this process of crossing vertical, horizontal planes, and the forward and back plane, which is connected, also brings you to the lower abdomen and the possibility of centering there. And this, of course, is centering in a certain level. We call it World 48, that is the level of the earth. And it's a kind of beginning point for most of us to center there. And it's a level of what? It's a level of being. I live at this level if I'm not taken by associations, by a personality. I begin to live more closely to my body itself. And so here, the reality of being for me at this moment might be this physical body and forms around me, people around me, and so on, that are connected on earth to this level, to this plane of existence. And this attempt to be kind of practical and come to my body and to World 48 is the reality in which I exist now. I cannot pretend, perhaps, that I'm on this very high level that Gurdjieff speaks about as the astral level, world 24, or the solar level, world 12, or Milky Way at the world 6. These are much higher levels of being. And so it would be useful for most of us to remember to begin here in this level, which is also connected with essence. The reality of my being is connected with personally with my essence. That is what I have been born with. And this is a very interesting topic in relation to being, because why have I been born with certain attributes? Why am I this type of body? Why am I focused more on one center rather than the other center? Emerging as man number 1, 2, or 3, for example. Why am I born in a certain family, and so on? All these aspects are connected with essence, and one sees essence is both an opportunity, right? It shows me things that gifts I might have, challenges that I might have. These all are connected with essence, but it's also a narrowing of possibilities. What I am, what I've been given, is perhaps not the same as somebody else. And you might have an ability to do art, but not an ability to do mathematics. You might not be physically coordinated, or you might be a gymnast. And so these are all connected with this reality of my being, and it's connected with the subjectivity of my being. That also is real. There's the objective and subjective.
So this reality of being is to do with how our centers are when we're born onto this earth, and how we develop them. And as you were saying, you might be a gymnast. That's probably because your moving center's more coordinated than maybe somebody else's.
Yes, exactly. The moving center would be literally more intelligent. So the intellectual part of the moving center would be more developed than most people. And that helps you do complicated movements. And this would also then connect with the medulla oblongata in the brain, which has this function of helping to deal with more complex movements and finer movements. So there is all these connective aspects to this reality of my essence and how it influences my life. That's part of the reality of being. Of course, being is much greater than me. So in a broader sense, the reality of being, the objective reality of being, is going to include all essences, just at the beginning, right? And every one of those essences is going to be remarkably different and have different qualities. And if you gathered, as we were talking about a group, if you gather different types and you gathered a group, you'd begin to have a quality of influences, and as well as a quantity that brings you closer to this more objective reality of being. Because my own little reality, right, is partial. But if I'm in a group, I begin to expand that reality, and what I was given in my essence, very important, but what I was given my essence is only part of what I need to understand being here in this reality. It's just a starting point. And so people provide me with this opportunity, this tremendous opportunity to grow. And without this, how much would I grow? As you were talking about, a lot of people try to study on their own. And they're limited because their choices are always going to be connected with what I like. you know, what I prefer, what I dislike. And I've had many times where a student would come and say, well, you know, I don't need this particular aspect of the work, you know, as if they understand what they need. Now, no, they understand what they prefer, you know, what they would like to be able to study. And these other things, perhaps I don't want to study, but need to. And that's what happens when you're in a group and you listen to somebody and they're talking about some other subject or in some other way that you don't like. You have to ask yourself, shall I go with that? Shall I go with this subjectivity, this internal considering maybe? Or shall I stop that? Should I limit this mechanical reaction, limit it right where it starts, right there, and see if I could just listen, if I could be open to a new viewpoint. And perhaps that viewpoint is not very interesting or useful. I don't know yet. So my reality of being, and this is connected with really the next step in centering. I'm centered now, let's say, not in my personality at the moment, although I need my personality, right? This is also part of this idea of centering. I have two poles, the external personality, the essence, and somehow I must stand in between. This is another aspect of centering of my being, is in between personality and the essence. So now I come into the center between them, and somewhere between them, there could potentially grow the seed of real I. It's not with only essence, although through essence, that's the ground of seed, that's the earth, you might say. But it also needs knowledge, needs experience in life, and these two come together and create this new center. And that new center, again, is connected with something much bigger than essence. Essence came down from on high. It comes down as in the picture. It comes down from up here through the ray of creation, through world 6, world 12, world 24, world 48. And where does it come from? Where are the choices made that brings you to this point now, right here, sitting here, of what your essence is and what challenges it has on earth at this time? And that must come from something else, something bigger. And this something more real we call the soul. So the soul of man somehow at some level, with perhaps other factors, creates decisions as to what you're going to be born with and where you're going to be born and to whom, and what you need to learn on this journey on the earth today. And so the reality of being for us is connected not just with essence, which again is partial, but with the soul, which is much less partial. Not to say it is fully developed either, but it has this this connection with being that is larger and perhaps wiser than as we come into this world and we enter into this sleeping, what becomes a sleeping essence. So not only are we looking at centering from the point of view of our focus, like our focus of attention, for example, as a verb rather than a noun, and we're looking also for the place in the noun, right? As I was saying, where things cross in me at this moment, at what level. but we're also looking at this much expanded idea, which Gurdjieff calls the soul, and says the soul's presence is I am. So if one considers there's in it a soul, or there's an embryonic soul, you might say, or something growing somewhere, then this is where it's possible to find I am, that individuality, which essence is here to help serve and to help grow. So almost as if we're coming from two ends of the stick, from the higher end down and from the lower end up, and somehow meeting these two, the higher blends with the lower, as Gurdjieff says in Law 3, to actualize the middle. Yes, that I, which we would call our I, which is a combination of higher and lower influences in us. So now, if I can come to this place, and if my vibration actually could raise a little bit, and I could see a little better, a little bit like an eagle or a bird who is able to look from a higher level down onto the earth, then I begin to connect not just with this world 48, which is down here at the abdominal level, and center there. Yes, I must keep this center there. But we're three-centered. Of course, in reality, we're seven centers, but let's keep it simple. We're three-centered. The moving body center. And also we have this other quality of being, another quality of being, which is connected with this higher vibration called the emotional center. So now I'm somehow have to divide my attention. I want to keep my relationship to my body. I don't want to lose that relationship, but I also want to raise up this vibration, this level of perception, this level of being perception, and this level of being activity, not only receiving, but giving, right? Back and forth. Yeah. That brings me to another world 24. And this world begins to be a world where you are taking in impressions in a more vivid way. And the impressions of myself and what's around me, the world around me, become more fluid, less structured. They begin to open up, and you begin to experience the world more as energy than just as matter. As we are, mostly we just see things as set forms. But then as you rise up a little bit and the vibration changes, these forms also begin to vibrate. And you begin to have a different reality of being. And you're centered not just in the physical world, but also in what Gurdjieff calls the astral world, and what becomes the astral body.
So to get to this other world, we need to work on our centers, and it's working on our lower centers so that we can then reach the higher centers. Is that correct?
Yeah, Debbie, that's right. And you might even say that if you can balance the 5 lower centers, and you recognize the idea that man, as we are, is the best we can attain at the moment, might be this balance of 5 centers, which leads towards man number 4, right? And man number 5 as well. And this balance of the centers and the bringing together of the energies, harmonizing them, allows for these centers to produce hydrogen 12, more hydrogen 12. And this is the linkage between the lower centers and higher emotional center. And so we need to begin to feel more, not just, be lost in our monkey mind. We need to feel our life. We need to intuit our life and become aware, as we've talked about, where you see in Egypt, you have Sekhmet, the cat goddess, and you see this understanding that these beings, these cats, often have a greater awareness of themselves and their environment than we do, and yet we're supposed to be higher, than the cat. But they are worthy symbols of this awareness we need to begin to have. And this, of course, totally changes the reality of our being, both our own being and our perception of being, both.
I'm working on a Sekhmet documentary at the moment, so it's very interesting you brought that up. She seems to be everywhere for me lately.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, for myself, when I first got into this work, I used to get the centres a bit, I used to get confused about the sex centre and the point of the sex centre, because it's that energy is supposed to be used to help the other centres. Maybe you could explain that a bit more?
Yes, I think it's rather interesting because you see that the functions are basically aligned with the level of the body, which is kind of makes sense, but at the same time seems a little strange. So my excretory functions are lower in my abdomen and below. And you say, okay, well, that certainly makes some sense, I guess, that the human body is built on a vertical axis, right? From lower to higher. And in the middle, I have the digestive and assimilative functions of the stomach, liver, spleen, and pancreas, so on. And as I rise up, I move into these higher functions, respiratory, and the heart, which gives us this movement of the blood. And of course, the movement of the blood connects the body to the emotions, according to Mr. Gurdjieff. And certainly through hormones, that's certainly true. The blood has the hormones in them. The hormones make these linkages that many of them connected with our emotional state. And then the next level is the development of the chi or prana, which we call Hambladzwan in the work. And this allows us to link between our driver, the head. Now we're talking about the real head, not the monkey mind, the head that contains my attention, and the emotions, the awareness. So now I begin to become a more linked and more balanced three-centered being. And in this triad of these three centers and the point in between, as I come together, as I'm centered between these three, then there's this doorway, there's this opening to a higher center. And the first opening then would be to this higher emotional state, which is symbolized by Sekhmet in Egypt, by the cat. And so now, if I'm practicing this, you see, as Lord Pentland used to say, you need to practice the food diagram. Right? Remember, we talked about that before. How to practice the food diagram. Well, I'm now practicing the food diagram. Yes, I'm now gradually building that energy through taking in impressions consciously, through taking in air consciously, not just counting them or something like some of these people do. This is nice, but it's not what we're talking about. But by following the air into my lungs, where it's assimilated, it breaks down, right? It's just molecules, right? It's atoms, and it assimilated into my bloodstream on one level. And this is where the mi-fa interval is, do, re, mi, fa. And I pass from mi, 48, to fa, 24, to this slightly higher energy, which gives me emotion, gives me feeling, Now I'm a little bit alive. I'm not a sort of walking zombie, you know. I'm here, present, yes, but also I begin to feel a certain life in me, which I didn't feel before. That's because I'm practicing this food diagram. I'm walking it up, you might say, as if you were walking up a series of stairs, like this. So, if I've been in the work, if I've been exposed to real teachings and initiated, you might say, into them, then I begin to know exactly, yes, not sort of fog, you know, kind of in a fog, you know, but precisely as an alchemist, what is needed and how to get there. Yeah. And I begin to raise my level, raise my vibration, balance the vibration between my centers, because if one is totally so much stronger than the others, then I won't find this harmony I need to collect this energy I need. So now I begin to see, oh, I forgot my body. You know, running around, I forgot my body. But now I come back into my body, even into the movement of the body. I'm here in the body, yes, as well as being in the mind with the attention and the impressions and with my breathing. So now I begin to act as a three-centered being. And this is, of course, the beginning of man number 4. The ability to do that. It's not crystallized, it's not brought all together in a way yet, but it's a starting point. And in that starting point, I begin to have access to this higher level being we call higher emotional center. I begin to feel, and of course this is the kind of impression spoken about by mystics, shamans, yes. When they see a tree, they're not just run over there and hug the tree, right? That's fine, no reason not to do that, but they are a part of that tree. They don't have to run over and hug it or show some kind of external manifestation that lets everybody know they love trees. You know, that's fine, but it's not necessary. They are a part of organic life on Earth. We've forgotten that. But when we come into these higher centers, we begin to feel, yes, I really am a part of what's around me, the people, the room, and of course, nature itself. Yes. I become connected or reconnected with this. And this is a profound experience, I think. And I think children often at a very young age experience this perception that they are not separate from everything, as occurs gradually in the development of personality, separated from essential being, my essence.
When they're little children, they've not had their personalities developed yet, have they? I remember one little child I knew, my friend's little child. She was only about 1.5, 2, and she was stroking the tree, but not touching the tree. It was like she was stroking its aura or something. She could see things that we couldn't.
Yes. Yes, I think, and with our center that we're going to create, we certainly, the International Center, we certainly, like Gurdjieff, want to have children around. We don't want to forget that, you know, that we were once children and that inside we still are. And when you have children around you and you're forced to stop, you might say, stop your usual personality orientation towards life, and you say, wait a minute, you know, I could for a moment be connected with who I am, with my essence at this moment, because these children are reminding me. Yeah. And of course, sometimes they will try your patience to an extent that's almost unbelievable. Yeah, they're not all angels. And that's another thing that one has to remember. Essence is not an angel. Yes, angel, essence combines negative and positive aspects of what we are given here. And there is a kind of romanticism about essence, which is unfortunate, because it reduces the possibility of you knowing yourself. And when you look at children, you can remember, children are sometimes just little devils, you know, sometimes almost impossible to deal with. And that's also good. That's also very good to see and to know. So we hope to have children around and animals around, and a whole sort of life, you know, community of life that tests people, that tests their interest in growing, and reminds them of who they could be. So I think, yes, children sometimes just spontaneously will be there. And maybe if you're listening or sensitive, you will see that. And that will help you, that will trigger something in you. And maybe you'll even remember something about who you are, who your essence is, right? How you were as a child, how you loved this thing, and you've totally forgot now that you loved, who knows, you know, flowers or something. And now you remember that. And so your reality begins to expand again. It has been truncated, it has been narrowed, it has been, you know, closed off. And all these conditions we're talking about, one of the values of them, which includes group and a teacher, is to reopen up first what is essential, is what is you subjectively, but then more than that, because what is you is not enough. You came here to learn. You came here to overcome yourself, you might say, to grow past yourself. So you begin by beginning to say, I noticed some things about myself that I forgot. And now I remember. I remember how much I liked poetry. I remember. I remember how I just liked to climb a hill. Whatever it is, you begin to you might say, construct who you are.
Well, being with nature is very important, isn't it? And I know Mr. Gurdjieff had on his, in the prairie, he had people working with the land, working with animals. He had quite a few animals on the farm, but he also used to go for drives, didn't he, out into the country to have picnics and things.
That's right. And that's certainly something that we intend to do, is have these kinds of expeditions, journeys and things throughout Spain. And there's some incredible nature there, as well as some fascinating sites of prehistoric caves and petroglyphs and things that are in Spain that we want to visit as well. But the experience of you might say, getting out of your ordinary series conditions, you know, and when I say conditions, I also mean conditioning, you know, that I live in a little house or apartment, and I spend so much time there. I go to my office or to my workplace and so on, and live a life that is conditioned tremendously. And one of the things that most influenced me when I was young, when I was 19, and I met my first group leader, Jim Flynn. I said to him, you know, what could help me? You know, here I was 19 years old, and he said, really widen your horizons. You know. And I took that as something, as something like a principle, you know, for me. And so I tried many things that I might not have tried. For example, I went with this friend of mine to international dancing at UCLA. Now, ordinarily, I would never have done that. But because I had this principle, I said, okay, let's try this. So I went, and there was Greek and Russian dancing and dancing from all over the world. And it was quite a good experience, you know. And it's kind of surprising at the time, you know, that I had this experience of an opening to something that ordinarily, probably even in my essence, I wouldn't have done. So these principles of learning about who you are, but not being limited, yes, to what I've been given, but open to much more than that, I think is very valuable, and something that people could do. They could try different things and don't. You could take a class in art, for example. You might not think of yourself as an artist. I'm certainly not an artist, but there's something about doing form and color, which is part of Mr. Gurdjieff's work, which can expand your essence. Essence is not set. Essence is given us to work with, like you have clay in you. Yeah, someone gives you a bunch of clay and says, here, you have this to work with. Well, what are you going to make out of it?
But you're saying, for example, going to the dancing, all these new impressions, they impress onto our centers, don't they? It's like a record, I suppose, of what we feel or see or understand from that, and helps develop us in a good or a bad way, depending on how we handled it.
Yes, it brings a new influence into our life. And of course, there may be some influences that you don't necessarily want to bring in, at least to any extent. People watch, of course, horror movies, for example, you know, where some monstrous thing is devouring people or something, and their body, which was created with instinct, right, with adrenaline and so on, the body is telling them this is dangerous now, because they're identifying and with this image on the screen, and their body is producing adrenaline, and the adrenaline's saying, get up and move, you know, get up and run or whatever, and one's stopping this instinctive response in the body. And gradually, of course, our connection with our instinctive center becomes worse and worse, because we've been inhibiting it in this way. And so this thrill that one gets through violence and danger in this context is actually very negative influence on us, and harms our connection with our instinctive center. Now, primitive people, of course, had a much better connection, and therefore they might have had a proximity sense, for example, that we miss now. And proximity sense is that sense, for example, that somebody is behind you. You didn't necessarily hear them or see them, but you know it. Your body, you know, maybe there was a kind of movement of your hairs in the back of your neck or something like that, and you're aware of that, right? There's a kind of sense of something around you. And so for us, it's very important to reconnect also with this, with our instinctive center, not be disconnected with it. Then you might,
obviously the other centers as well, like with your emotional center, like using the analogy you were saying about the horror movie, you know, you're getting frightened or maybe a little bit scared by the movie, and then you're not using again it in the right way, are you?
Well, you're telling your instinctive and emotional center to shut down, basically, not to respond normally or naturally. And this also tends to shut essence down, which is connected with it. So yes, it's not a fruitful influence. So not all influences are going to be useful, and certainly not with children when they have not even necessarily the driver sort of in charge saying, "Oh, it's okay. This is a movie. This is not reality." So for children, certainly those influences are potentially harmful.
Would it be the intelligence center saying, "This is a movie, don't be frightened"?
Yes, this would be the intellectual center, and this is where, of course, the driver, if he has begun to learn to speak to the horse, to the emotions, and to the body, begin to learn to communicate, and this is through Hamlet's one, right? Remember, the linkage is through this energy. Yeah? So on one hand, you have to have knowledge of how to communicate with your emotions, and on the other hand, you have to have a link to communicate. These two are both necessary, and then through that, and through practicing that, you can begin to, for example, if the horse is afraid of being in public with people, or is afraid of driving, or is afraid of something else, you can begin to coax it and begin to tell it, this is going to be okay. Just like an adult would tell a child, basically, this is going to be okay. Work with me on it, and we will get through this, and we'll be able to continue on our journey, wherever that may be.
I suppose we're talking here of Gurdjieff's analogy of the horse and carriage. Not everyone would perhaps know what that is, so maybe we could quickly go over that.
Well, as you know, there is this wonderful video that's available now on the net, on YouTube, Master of the Carriage. And I think that was extremely well done. I don't know if everybody's seen that. Because Michel de Salzman was involved with that, creating that process. And it's very, very useful to understand the work by looking at that video. It's claymation. But the concept itself is from India, from ancient India. And the idea is that human beings are giving this analogy of like the carriage, that is the structure, which is the body. And there's a horse, which is the emotions, and there's the driver, which is the head. And unfortunately, the driver is asleep, basically, or drunk. And so, and the horse is not fed properly, and the carriage is not greased properly. And in particular, Gurdjieff mentions that the carriage was built to go over rough roads. And as it goes over rough roads, then the grease is distributed, for example, and there's less friction and there's less wear and tear on it. But modern people, there's no rough roads. There's a smooth road that we basically live on. And anybody who's done really heavy physical work, where you really were sweating and you wear yourself out and using picks and shovels, or gathering rocks or something like this, heavy physical work, what it's like for the body to engage in this kind of activity, and how it creates circulation in the body, and how it moves through the joints, how it produces chi, circulation of this life energy. And if you don't do that, if you live all the time just in office and at home and sort of, and you don't walk perhaps too much, you get in your car to go to the store, more and more life is a kind of smooth road. And so the body doesn't get the right activity and it wears out more quickly. And of course, the body is connected as the body, the carriage and the horse is connected together. And this is a very solid connection that is there, and that is through the blood. And so as I experience my heart beating, of course, I have to be pretty quiet and can't be absorbed in associations. I have to repel the associations, basically, stop them. And then I can be in touch with my heart beating and the blood flowing in my body. And this blood is the linkage between me and my horse, or me and my emotions, my body and emotion. And this is very, very important linkage, but it is a linkage that exists. It's not something that so much that you have to produce, but you can be more or less conscious of it. And in fact, blood, according to Gurdjieff, and you can try to understand this, that blood has not only the qualities that Western physiology speaks about, but it has many, many finer qualities that exist in it, and that can be increased or decreased by conscious action upon the blood. And of course, you remember Gurdjieff talks about how with certain points, you could affect the flow of blood and bring people into a hypnotic state, bring them down into a subconscious state rather than a conscious state. And this is a very, very old system connected with the meridians in China, and also with probably with the prana in India, although I'm not as familiar with the Indian system. So here you're linking the conscious and subconscious parts of ourselves through the blood, through becoming aware of the blood and the circulation of the blood. And the other level, the next level up from that, as we're practicing this food diagram idea, is this connection to Hamblodzwan, which is otherwise known as Qi in the Taoist system, and prana in India has other names, Ruach, etc. Throughout the world, there are names for this energy, life energy. And this is the metaphor, is the reins that the driver holds. So he has reins and he can pull to the right or pull to the left, and the horse or the emotions are going to move more or less in the direction that these reins are pulled. And but it's very crude communication, you know. And it's interesting, this idea, of course, of right and left brains and so on. This linkage is quite interesting. So now I have these reins, but he says, well, these reins are not very secure, and that due to different environmental conditions, if it's wet or hot or cold, etc., all kinds of things, that the ability to use these reins decreases, and therefore your relation between your head, your intellect, which is supposedly the highest part of man, and the emotions, the horse, becomes attenuated, sort of cut off, you might say, at some point. And in order to increase the strength of the linkage, the reins, one has to increase the Hamblodzwan. And Hamblodzwan, if you hear the word blood, I imagine that's from a Germanic root, and that means the blood of the astral body. So you need to increase this, and the way to increase it is what we talked about before, is working the food diagram, bringing the centers together so that they don't waste energy as they tend to do. And then you accumulate this level, hydrogen 24, this level of energy, which links us not only to between our emotions and our intellect, but also to the astral level or the planetary level. So now,
sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say that helps develop your Keshjan body.
The Keshjan body, yes, but that's the next level,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
above astral. And yes, if I begin to create more hydrogen-12, which is mostly right now only in the sex center, that's the food octave, where you come up from do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, 12, right? And you have this energy, this powerful energy which allows one to reproduce the human body in which the soul descends and essence descends into, but to reproduce this incredibly complex machine, you might say, organism. And this is the level where creation exists. Yes, when we talk about God created man from clay. Right? Such a beautiful. Did you ever see the sculpture on Notre Dame, where God is there and is creating Adam from clay, and the top part of Adam is made and the lower part is being formed?
No, I've not been to Notre Dame, but one day.
You're not far away. You're in England. So it's a wonderful sculpture, and it gives you really the feeling of this rising up from the earth level, world 48, right? And this creative energy, which would be, again, hydrogen 12, right? 48, 12. And this creative energy coming up and forming this form that can lead to consciousness, the human body. And so here you have this sort of beautiful analogy in art of it. And we ourselves are co-creating this higher body in us from lower level and molding it, you might say, into another level of being, where the being not only can be touched, you don't just touch, but you actually live from this level. Yes, you are on this level. You incorporate the lower level. You still are here in the world, right, until your physical body dies. You're still here in the world. You still are linked in, and this is, of course, part of what Gurdjieff calls our duty, our being duty. So our being reality is connected with our responsibility, our duty, and that duty is to form a bridge between higher and lower worlds. That's why we're here as human beings, objectively. And as we begin to build that bridge, we fulfill our being duty. And if we could build the bridge up to the level of Mr. Gurdjieff, man number 7, or he seems to indicate that Jesus was man number 8, which is up at the highest level there, just before the Son Absolute, then we would complete our reason for being. Not our personal reason, but our objective reason for being, or maybe these two become one at the highest level.
It sounds so easy, doesn't it, to do? But in practice, it's, well, as Gurdjieff says, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of work.
Tremendous, and this is what it seems that our generations today are, their will is extraordinarily weak. Their willfulness is strong, but their will is very weak.
Can you see the difference between will and willfulness?
Yes. Willfulness is basically, what do I want? And I'm going to do whatever I can to get it. And will is, what do I wish? What is my purpose inner purpose, and how can I fulfill it? So will and willfulness are two opposing things.
So having to work on that kind of thing, by working on our centers, that's a will, isn't it? We're willing it to happen. So we want to.
That's right.
Because I remember Gurdjieff had some kind of prayer. I sometimes get this round the wrong way. I will, I wish I can.
There are several, but yes, one is the I am, which, as I said before, that whose presence is the soul's presence is I am. I am represents the central centering of my being, I, and the two poles of am, that is the current that runs down towards entropy, the creation current, and the current which I have to intentionally activate and work on, the evolutionary current. And when these two currents begin to be balanced together, there I am.
So it's like the pendulum, isn't it?
Yes.
Your essence, personality, and you want to try and come to the middle where the pendulum rests. And once you're rested, you're supposed to be centered or harmonious.
That's right. And this pendulum is very interesting because you have it in every center. In the intellectual center, you have yes and no. Yes. It's the duality of formatory mind, of ordinary mind, yes and no. It's when you hear something somebody says, you say, yes, that's right. Yes. Why? Because I think it's right. Or no, it's wrong. And this is, you know, this is a level of intellect which is very, very limited. This idea of yes and no. Yeah. And in the emotions, of course, we have I like it, I don't like it. And again, it's based on what? It's based on basically mechanical preferences, subjective preferences. And in the body, it's the same thing. You know, that we have this liking or this disliking of things. And so what if in the head, you felt, okay, now I have this idea and I have this other idea, and these are two seemingly opposing ideas about myself. On one hand, Gurdjieff, for example, gives us the idea is you're a machine. If you really feel that, that's a terrifying idea. I'm a machine, I know. And he says that the behaviorist got it right, you know, that you're like Pavlovian dogs. Yeah. On one hand, here you are. And on the other hand, you are this amazing possibility of an evolving being. Yeah. And you're sitting in between these two. Can you accept both of them? Or will you run from one to the other? You know, oh no, I'm not a machine, you know, I'm alive, I'm awake. Or, oh my God, I'm a machine, I'm so depressed, you know, poor me, you know. But if you were to sit in between of these two opposing realities, you would come to a new perception of yourself. Yes, yes, I am a machine and I am this evolving being now, simultaneously.
So it's not yes or no, it's yes and no.
In a way, yeah. Of course, this is a very simplistic way of resolving this, this conflict, but it is a starting point, you might say, for developing real reason. It's better than duality thinking. Right? But duality thinking, real duality thinking, that is what I call paradigmatic thinking, because a paradigm is having two ideas held at the same time. It's not what is the best thing. That's not really the real meaning of paradigm, but it's to hold two divergent concepts, or for example, your opinion and my opinion at the same time, rather than saying I'm right and you're wrong, or vice versa. I listen to your opinion, and I'm hearing my opinion, and I'm not going with either of these, but I'm holding them together. I'm saying, this is interesting. And this is, of course, the basis of real negotiation. Real negotiation in life is being able to listen to the other person and not rejecting it or not being suggestible to it either, but holding it, keeping it. And then this third force can come down and create, you might say, a new reality, a reality of being.
It's interesting you're saying about the listening, and you've mentioned it a few times today, because I'm currently reading about Dag Hammarskjöld, you know, the UN General
Sure.
Secretary General, and he was saying that in his book that one of the reasons he thought was very important for his role in his job was to listen, and he was trying to get other people to listen to each other, wasn't he? And it's something that is quite still going on today. People are not listening to each other.
Well, you know, and this also is connected with this idea of centering. That is, when you have polarities and you do not allow yourself to run to one or the other polarity, and you say, well, I'm going to listen. I'm going to be in the middle, you might say, centered, you know, and this, of course, you sort of see in the old American Indian tradition, where they would sit around with their pipe, and you'd have, I remember I was friends a little bit with this white bear, one guy, and he was the co-author of Book of the Hopi. But the Indians would talk, and they would talk in this kind of very slow way, which Americans and I think most people in general would find very irritating, you know, but very deliberative they would speak, and almost as if they're not saying, yes, I'm right, but simply saying, this is my truth. This is, and then somebody else would speak, and they would go after that person spoke in the circle. They would go, ho, you know, everybody would go, ho, yeah, and wow, this is interesting. Everybody is, in a sense, saying, yes, we hear you, ho, and that's it, and no but. And so then the next person would speak, and again, very deliberative usually, and I'm not saying they weren't emotional about some things, they certainly were, but I think this ability, and this is actually in a way similar to what group work is like, and I think it might even benefit group work if after somebody says something, for everybody to say, oh, and it sort of wakes you up a little bit too, because you're forced to participate, right? And you may have some kind of internal considering regarding what the person says, but you don't allow it. Yeah, this is wonderful for the ego. I don't allow it. I'm in group. I don't allow myself to judge. Boom. Wow, what a discipline. What a tremendous discipline. And that took me years to understand, because when I was in a group, when I was young, 19, 20, 21, those years, beginning in group, I would hear some people say something, I'd say, God, is that stupid? You know, not out loud, of course, but in my head, you know, God, what's wrong with that person? Haven't they read the books? Don't they know anything? You know, and so on. And I didn't realize, or maybe I did inside realize, but not completely. I didn't realize that I was harming my own possibilities by being judgmental, and I was betraying the whole sort of value of the group, the whole meaning of group work, of what should become a kind of brotherhood, yes, where I valued what the other person would say. And I began to understand that at some point, and I remember this one woman who was the wife of a friend of mine there, a little older than me, and she was rather simple in the sense of intellect. And I said to myself, I want to really listen to this person. I want to listen. I want to totally let go of my feeling of superiority about ideas. Yes. And I began to listen to her. And the more I listened to her, the more I realized she had something to say. And the more I realized what she had to say was important to me. What a revelation, And this was one of those turning points where then every time this woman spoke, especially in the larger group, she wasn't in my regular group, almost every time I would say something to her about how valuable what she said was, because I knew that she didn't have a great deal of self-confidence in what she was saying. And it took courage, to come out realizing that you had people with much greater intellectual ability and so on, and which is intimidating to a lot of people. Certainly if you were with Uspensky, you would be intimidated, or Raj or somebody like this. And so this woman was giving something, you see, giving the group something, giving me something that other people weren't giving, because she was overcoming something in herself. There was a kind of sincerity there. And so this is another incredibly valuable part of group work. And again, the widening, right? The widening of essence. Essence has preferences. Yes, I like green. I don't like pink, whatever. Yes, it has preferences. But what's the meaning of these preferences? I don't know. Are they objective? Well, of course not, because somebody else loves pink. They're not objective, they're subjective. And are they inhibiting me? Yes, they're giving me something, yes, but are they also inhibiting me? So when in group, you're forced in a way, if you're sincere about group work, you're forced to listen if you're sincere. And you're forced to let go of your own preferences. So I think it's indispensable, and certainly Gurdjieff said it was indispensable to be connected with a group.
Well, he also said we have to like what it does not like.
Oh, yes. Now you're talking about difficult things, but yes, you can practice that in group, you see. On your own, it's rather difficult to practice, but in group, you have the support of the group. If it's a group, and even a young group that's relatively sincere, they all have this same wish. Yes, they're seekers of truth. Behind it all, they're seekers of truth. And so now I begin to feel that, and I begin to orient myself to this common aim in the group.
And you're with a group today, and you continue to do workshops, don't you, in different places or wherever you can?
Yes. Mostly I'm working out of Moscow but I've given workshops in such diverse places as Beirut, Lebanon, and Cuernavaca, Mexico, and Los Angeles, and Kiev, and so on, Crimea. And now we're going to develop this program in Spain, somewhere near Valencia, Spain, where we can have an organized work. And certainly some of the experiments that have gone before us, including Stavely's farm in Oregon, and Cornelius down in Southern Oregon, and Bennett's attempts, and Gurdjieff's puree. All these different experiments were also Taliesin, you know, where that kind of very interesting experiment between developing school of architecture and Gurdjieff through Ogilvana Lloyd Wright and Frank Lloyd Wright. That was a very interesting experiment. All these experiments now, we're going to try to draw together the best of these, you know, the best practices. Try not to make the same mistakes, which obviously is not going to be easy. We will make mistakes, and develop a whole community and a whole set of conditions in which it's possible not only to work, but to bring together the fragments of the work. Gurdjieff and Spensky talks about the fragments of an unknown teaching. We are here to bring together these fragments, to make them more a whole, and to synergize the work, so that different, like in this diagram, different aspects of what we are trying are able to be brought together as one. So that if someone says, well, we have this idea of many eyes, and in this moment, maybe I can experience one eye or two eyes. It's very interesting. But there's something more real in me too at this moment. There's this deputy steward. There's this part of me that's trying to understand the work and trying to bring together the functions and the eyes and so on together so that they're reunified. So I don't just take this one idea, many eyes, but I take, for example, counterbalancing idea is essence, deputy steward, so on, that is leading towards unity, while the many eyes, of course, are leading away from unity. So more and more integrate Mr. Gurdjieff's ideas and provide exercises, provide workshops, provide different kinds of activities that will bring together the ideas and integrate them. And therefore, our hope is to accelerate the evolution of human beings.
Which needs to be done.
I think it's possible. I've certainly been working towards this for 50 years. Some ideas and some experiments that I think have been useful. And we're going to have a wisdom circle, as you know, of other people who have been in the work a long time and who will bring their expertise, and we will listen to them in a kind of group format I've actually already, we began that a while ago with a few people, and we're going to do that, and thereby try to call together the what has been learned, and not just repeat what has been done. Certainly, there are many things we will repeat, we'll use, but not just repeat. We're here as the famous analogy of the bees. You know, the bees go to the different flowers, collect the pollen. Well, we want to collect the pollen from all these past experiments, from all these people, Gurdjieff, Madame, Michel, Lord Pentland, all these different people who who have worked and tried to collect this and bring it together and create a new product, a new super, you might say, nutrient like honey or royal jelly, and see if we cannot find people, if there are people left on earth who really want to evolve and not just pretend on the internet, you know.
Genuine seekers.
Yes, that are willing to give up something to get something. And I think, you know, I always come back to this idea in the Bible, you know, the idea that willing to sell everything for the pearl of great price, for this development of this, like in Om, right? In the jewel or pearl in the lotus, the development of I and development of the higher bodies that are connected with this I, so that the I will exist not just on the level of world 48, but will begin to exist on the level of 24 or 12, or perhaps higher, and to redevelop, recreate the initiate system of Ashyata Shimash that Gurdjieff talks about in Beelzebub as a viable method of not only transforming ourselves, but potentially transforming a society.
Maybe we should quickly explain who Ashyata Shimash was.
Boy,
He's
that's
from Beelzebub's Tales, isn't he? He's a character from Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, a very important character.
yeah, and Gurdjieff at least once said, "I am Ashyata Shimash."
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, and it's difficult. Certainly, I tend to go. I think it was with Bennett here, and think that he's referring to Zoroaster or Zarathustra, as it's also is called, because having read some of the books of Zoroaster, they certainly seem to dovetail with things that Gurdjieff speaks about. And what it was is that around the 6th century BC, although Zoroaster may well be a title rather than just an individual, and Gurdjieff says Christ is also like that. The word Christ means, of course, anointed one. And so anybody that works up to the level of that Jesus went through, level man number 7, would be considered to be a Christ. Not Jesus Christ, but a Christ.
Yeah.
And so Zoroaster can mean son of star child. And so here in the book, he says that around the time of the adherents of Legomenisms and Pythagoras and so on, and Pythagoras was supposed to be a student of Zoroaster as well, that Ashyata Shimash went through tremendous suffering and pondering of what could change the course of human life, what could actually alter a society, because of course everybody in society is focused on the external. They want to change this or that on the outside. They want to do something about global warming, they want to do something about wars or whatever. And all these things are admirable, but of course nothing changes in thousands of years since Jesus or from Buddha. Nothing has changed based upon that external activities. And so he says, could there be the possibility of attaining a very high being reason, a very high level of reality of being in myself? And could I then work with 2 people, just 2 people? And could I help them initiate themselves, you might say, but also initiate them into this very high level of being? very modest, yes. And those two people, could they also go out and find two people? And so on and so forth. And a little bit like that old story about the rice. You remember about the guy who, the king said to the man, what do you want in reward for your services? And the man said, well, I'd like you to give me a grain of rice and then double that grain and then double that 64 times. That's all. And of course, this exponential, this became, of course, more rice than the king or anyone else could provide. And so this is, in a sense, this idea. I mean, could you, of course, the difficulty is, can you maintain the potency of the ideas as you move out into 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, all over 512, continuing, expanding. Could you maintain the integrity and the density of intelligence and so on? Apparently, Zoroaster and Ashiashimas somehow was able to do that, somehow found those people, you know, that had sufficient wish, sufficient will to move through into these higher levels of being. We don't know what it was, man number 5, at least, something like this. And then even the higher people, the king, for example, and I don't remember his name in Zoroaster, Ash something, became a disciple. And so it spread into these hierarchies, which you wouldn't expect, human hierarchies, you know. And I know Jerry Needleman, who's in the work, I know he talked to a number of government people over the years and wrote some books. I don't know if it's helped at all, but it's certainly an ambitious idea. But they, of course, are not disciples. They were just being, you know, given ideas. And so could again, this area, of course, this was Persia, what we call Persia, we call Iran now. But this whole area, which has been so terribly contested and full of wars and things for so long, the Central Asian area with Iraq, which wasn't a country before, but Afghanistan, all these now countries, could there be a process in which this leaven, leaven like you put into dough for bread, this leaven, this effect of this leaven could spread throughout the form of this, a society or a larger group of people, and transform it. Is it possible? Well, we don't know. But we could begin with ourselves. That we can begin with, and with a few other people. And of course, it appeals to only a few people because people don't want to work on themselves. You know,
people like they're suffering.
They're suffering, yes. And Gurdjieff says, of course, only the knowledge that we're going to die. The reality of this body is gone. I'm 70 years old. Of course, it's going to go soon. You know, this body's going to go. You know, and everybody, if people began to understand that, not go into self-pity, right, but say, oh, I need to make use of this life. If even a few people begin to understand that and actually work on themselves and participate and give something of themselves to it, then we might create, who knows, like what Bennett said, a new world. And we may, as Madame said, she said, if some people don't grow in consciousness, don't participate in this evolutionary current, then the earth is going to fall down. And it certainly is falling down one way or the other, whether you think there's a coming ice age or a coming heat wave, right? These two extremes are both on the table with the Maunder minimum, right? The sunspot minimum that we have now. It could turn into a mini ice age like occurred several hundred years ago. And there's no stopping it. We don't have the power to stop that, you know, if it does. Or we could go to global warming. And either of these are possible, we don't know. And there are so many other things. There's these potential pandemics, you know, epidemics. There's all kinds of different things that can happen. And here we are, and our life is going by, and we're complaining about it, but we're not working on ourselves. And
people are waiting for a hero.
right, someone to save us.
Yes, so we've got to save ourselves.
He already came. That was Gurdjieff, as far as I'm concerned. You know, he came, he told us what we need to do, but are we going to do it? And even if it's what they used to call a remnant, you know, remnant is a piece of a material. Even if a remnant begins like with Noah's Ark, you know, it began with, again, these kind of things, right? Noah and his wife, right? 2, 4, 6, 8. You begin with a small group of people, and we may, of course, begin with a small group of people. That's fine. But if we create a strong nucleus, it will attract more people. So we'll see.
It can work. I'm just seeing what the time is. I'm going to have to go soon. So I just wanted to finish off with, obviously your book's out and you're working on the second one. Your book's available on Amazon and other good ebook sites, I suppose. It's not just an ebook though, it's in paperback as well, isn't it? Yes, it is. Yeah. And if people were interested in what we was discussing earlier about, you know, you're putting together a centre or coming to workshops, is there a website or something they can go to? Lucy, you want to give them?
There is actually, Debbie, a website coming.
Usi will.
Usi will explain.
I'm sorry, you may not have heard that. So there is actually a website, and we're releasing that for the International School of the Fourth Way by the end of this month. And
okay.
The domain for that is ISC.
T.
Let me just check that again because we were just working on that now.
Because obviously when we put this up on YouTube, it'll probably be up and ready by the end.
ISTFW. It's ISTFW.com.
Okay, I'll put a link to that as well at the bottom in the comments section as well.
Right, that's our website, and of course Alan has a Facebook group which is related to Fourth Way called Q&A with M, which stands for Master. The name is abbreviated, of Fourth Way. So that is a Facebook group, a private group that anybody can join and you know, read and ask questions directly from Alan, who has 50 years again of experience in the Fourth Way.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you, Alan. That was a fantastic talk. Sorry I have to go, but I have.
Thank you, Debbie. Good luck on your weather there in England.
I know it's a bit blowy out.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll do another one of these again soon. And thank your class or your workshop for everyone for letting me talk to you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.